This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
It's Thursday, the 18th day of May. Thank you so much for downloading the Chris Stigall Show podcast. Coming up, a good one for you today. Some in-depth analysis from Andrew C. McCarthy, former federal prosecutor who has written the book on the collusion hoax that was the 2015-2016 presidential race, ultimate election and presidency of Donald Trump. The entire basis of the first impeachment was predicated on this hoax, this myth that Donald Trump was working with the Russians. The Durham report comes out. This is my first chance to talk with Andy about it, and this is the first time that you will hear Andy say he is now convinced that, yes, in fact, real crimes have been committed. Lying to a FISA court is criminal, that it is prosecutable. That has not been Andy's position heretofore until it was conclusively proven that that's what happened. The problem is, who can you name? Who's actually physically responsible for it? So we're going to get into that. Also, Julio Rosas is with us. Yesterday, he's my colleague at Town Hall, and yesterday up on Capitol Hill, they had a hearing. The hearing was called the weaponization of government, I believe. Nope, sorry. It was the House Homeland Security Committee hearing on left-wing violence. And this pipsqueak congressman from New York started picking on Julio, who's a Marine, and as I said, a colleague and friend at Town Hall and the Salem Media Group. Started picking on Julio as some sort of illegitimate reporter, Julio having none of it, though, and gave it right back, and now has catapulted his book back to a bestseller nationwide called Fiery But Mostly Peaceful, the 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. And the stories continue to pile in about teachers and whole wings of state governments moving heaven and earth, doing their level best to get at your kids on this sexuality and gender confusion thing. These stories are just constant. The language from the White House about your children continues to alarm me. And as you know, this is a particular focus of mine and my wife's. Rescuing your children from the education system, I believe, is truly what saves your family and saves this country. That is, in my heart and soul, where it starts, before elections or anything else. So some more stories that I encourage you to settle in and buckle up for, because they're infuriating. But first, let me tell you about the guy that makes the show possible, and a guy that I believe will save you big-time money if you give him a call. Do you buy your own health insurance? If you do, then you have to make a phone call today to John Ruhlman at usmedicalplan.com. usmedicalplan.com is the website. The number is 877-410-4321. Now, listen, if you have a small business and you're paying for your own health insurance, your employees' health insurance, you buy your spouse and your kids' health insurance. I have a friend whose daughter had some special health concerns, and then he has 3 other members of his family, including himself, and he was paying an exorbitant, back-breaking sum of money a month to insure that family for health insurance. He talks with the office and saves $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month. And he got better coverage. He wrote me to say, Chris, I got better coverage and a $2,000 less bill a month on my health insurance premiums by making the call. John Ruhlman, usmedicalplan.com or 877-410-4321. Seniors, fixed income, you buy a supplemental plan, this is a no-brainer. 30 to 60% savings on a better health insurance plan from a private sector market. And it's just, look, you can't, none of us can save money fast enough these days in this inflationary period. So check out the video of my conversation with John at chrisstigall.com. We talked about 40 minutes about a lot of things so you can get a sense of who he is. I think you're going to love doing business with them. We're grateful of their sponsorship to the show, and I know you're going to be grateful to save the money. usmedicalplan.com. Got some stuff in the education stack today I wanted to call your attention to. There were actually a few. This one I sat on for a while, and now seems to be just as good a time as any to break it out. From Carrie Lucas at the Daily Caller. It was a Mother's Day piece. And Carrie Lucas is actually a member of the Independent Women's Forum. She's the president, as a matter of fact. And she wrote this editorial as a mom for Mother's Day. And she said, flowers, cards, and breakfast in bed may be iconic Mother's Day gifts, but conventional wisdom now holds that what busy moms really want is a break from the stress of caring for others. Well, Mother's Day now includes annual calls for more societal support, financial and otherwise, to help overburden moms, often juggling jobs as well as caregiving responsibilities. And that's all fine. She said, but this year, I'd like to get more specific. We moms could definitely use a more supportive society for raising our kids, and that begins with fighting trends that are making parenting so much harder than it should be. She says, I've been a parent for nearly 18 years, raising 5 kids, and have watched as the culture that surrounds children becomes more and more coarse and hostile to children's interests. Today, parents can no longer trust that programming billed as appropriate for preschoolers really will be. You know, it's a fine point, actually, as we sit here and discuss bikini-clad women marketing beer to adult men. They're perfectly fine with cartoons now teaching your children that gender is something they can change at will. And using they, them as pronouns in cartoons. So we're a culture now that says a bikini-clad woman selling beer to a grown man is bad, teaching an 8-year-old that he can change himself to a girl, chemically castrate himself, and take hormones. That's good. Think of the perverse place we find ourselves. Grown men, it's disgusting for masculine grown men to find grown attractive women attractive, but it's perfectly logical and, in fact, gender affirming to pump little children full of chemicals to change their gender. That's where we've come as a culture. Progress. So anyway, back to the piece from Carrie Lucas. Parents used to be able to let their kids indulge in a couple of hours of Saturday morning cartoons without really having to think too much about it. Now, parents know that media companies, particularly, that's another, sorry, I'm just interrupting myself to ask a question. You have a youngster toddling around your home. I don't know how much media he consumes, but how mindful are you that your toddler is turning on an iPad, turning on a TV screen or a Netflix show, or if you put one on, are you watching closely, really closely, what the messages are in those things? Because, look, I'll be honest. I did this as a parent. Oh, I just need a bake. Click, and the kid is hypnotized by the screen, and it gives you a minute to breathe. You know, walk outside, take a breath, go upstairs, fold the laundry. The screen occupies the kid. I did it. I confess. So it would be less than honest if I said I knew every minute of what my kids were consuming on a screen. Now, most of the time, it was like a Scooby-Doo cartoon or something. So I falsely, but presumed that there wasn't anything objectionable in it. I'm not so sure you can trust that today, Fast Eddie. That's just, I mean, I'm 46. My oldest is 18. I'm not that far removed from it, but I'm seeing cartoons now where the cartoon is introducing itself as they, them. So are you mindful of that with a toddler?
I am. And luckily, my wife is a teacher, so it's like she knows, for instance, Coco Melon, right? The way Coco Melon on YouTube is designed, it's designed to grab your kid's attention and keep it. It's so erratic.
What is that? I don't think I know what that is.
It's like this cartoon, like they sing songs, and it's just like stories that happen, you know, featuring a little kid. Let's just say their wheels on the bus, right?
Okay.
It'll be, you know, the bus driver and then the kids in the back, but
so they're created to grab little toddlers' attention.
They are, but too much so. This is how kids get roped in with this YouTube rabbit hole.
Yep.
So we do not watch any Coco Melon, but it's literally like the images are on screen about 4 seconds, and then it switches. So in that respect, we're good. As far as the content, like actual shows that he watches, there's one called Stinky and Dirty, and that's his favorite one. It's an excavator and a dump truck and a trash truck. And literally what they're doing is just solving problems. So, you know, they need to get bowling balls up a hill to the bowling alley. So they have to figure out how they're going to do that. So that's the only cartoon
Nothing objectionable in that.
No.
But are you, yeah, I mean, but like, I don't know, is it on an iPad or is it on a TV screen, or how do you show it to him?
Only on the TV.
Okay.
And if he starts whining about it, that's it. Like it's the screen time's done.
So it's not like he can toggle over to something else.
Correct. Yep.
While you're not watching or whatever.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I ask that because Carrie Lucas is, of course, exactly right. In fact, I lost this study. I'll go find it again. Kids have now been polled and asked if they could, what was it? If they'd give up their right to vote or social media first. And most of them said they'd give up their right to vote or some such thing. So, I mean, yes, obviously, different story, but how addictive it is one thing. But the other thing is the content that they're addicted to. So anyway, parents used to be able to let their kids indulge in a couple of hours of Saturday morning cartoons without really having to think too much about it. Now parents know that media companies, particularly those targeting kids, see part of their mission as pushing a political agenda. Why have we complicated the innocent world of children's television so that parents have to wonder about the sexual messages and gender identities of the cartoon characters on our television sets? It's not just the media. Same goes for our schools. Parents used to walk in and out of their elementary schoolers' classrooms, take part in library time, feel confident their schools were a partner in teaching, not just ABCs, but positive lessons about personal responsibility and basic good behavior. Today, parents like me are told we'll have to submit FOIA requests and typically pay $100 fees if we want to know the content of our public schools' curriculums. Fear of the spread of COVID allowed schools to embrace policies meant to keep parents out of classrooms, libraries, and the hallways of our schools. Yet these practices now remain. As a fifth grade class mom, I recently showed up to drop off a gift for Teacher Appreciation Week, and I was told I had to leave it at the office. I couldn't actually go into my child's classroom. I sadly realized that it was for the best, since I would have struggled to even find my daughter's classroom, since getting past the front office is now taboo. It didn't used to be like this. Parents shouldn't have to wonder what's happening in their children's schools. School systems shouldn't fight so hard to keep parents in the dark. And this goes on. It's a wonderfully important piece. It's called The Break Moms Need. She says, parenting was never supposed to be easy, but it wasn't supposed to be this hard. Parents are prepared to create rules and deal with skin knees, mean teachers, garden variety bad kids, but now parents have to fight each day to keep the worst that society has to offer away from our children. It's exhausting, and we need to do better. Society should consider how we can pull back from these terrible trends, which surely must be contributing to mental health crises facing teens and young adults, reinstate a healthy culture for the good of kids and moms and dads who love them. It would be a opportune time to mention to you that I have a friend at church who is in juvenile counseling, middle schoolers and high schools primarily. She's booked. You can't get into her. And that is the case. If you know anybody that counsels young people in this country, you know that's their story. They're all booked. Therapists across this country are booked solid. Like you get on a waiting list if you want to put your kid in to see somebody for counseling right now. It's dire. So, yes, once again, we've come to this place, and Carrie Lucas, this piece, The Break Moms Need, it's the Daily Caller. I recommend it to you. Bikini-clad women selling beer to men, bad. Keeping you as a parent away from your child's classroom, not allowing your child or giving your child this kind of private, secret relationship with teachers and administration at a school, keeping things like wanting to change their gender or their sexuality, keeping that from you, actively working against you as a parent, that's good. Genital mutilation of our children, that's good. It's a weird time. Masculine men, feminine women, bad. Mutilating young children, good. It's just pit of hell stuff. Massachusetts state agency seeks law targeting parents who deny kids gender-affirming care. Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth, which advises state agencies on policies and programs for LGBTQ kids, submitted its report and recommendations on child welfare asking that their Democrat governor and Democrat majority legislature, quote, improve Massachusetts child abuse laws to explicitly include the withholding of gender-affirming care. Meaning, once again, you will be accused of abuse if you do not give your child chemical castration when he or she requests it. That's Massachusetts. From, I think I had this earlier in the week, but it bears repeating, from hot air, just how much of a disaster were the COVID restrictions? Well, they've done a study now. Harvard, Stanford, Dartmouth, and Johns Hopkins have joined together as a team of researchers investigating what kind of impact COVID and closures on schools had on kids. Well, it was huge. The longer schools are closed, regardless of race or income, the worse the outcomes for students and the more persistent the losses. And the more social restrictions put on child social activity outside of school, the worse off the children were. A team of researchers studied this, and the bottom line, learning loss was consistent and universal regardless of demographics. Black, white, rich, poor, didn't matter. The longer kids were kept out of schools, the worse the learning loss. And so far, we had this for you. What was it, just 8% of middle school kids knew civics at all? So far, no learning recovery has taken place. It's a disaster. I mean, we are in this gross time in American history where adult men can become women. Women are not allowed to be beautiful or sexy. Children can now change their gender at even the youngest age of 2. They can discuss this stuff in private with teachers and school staff administrators. Parents can't get into schools to see what the hell's going on. And when they speak up at school board meetings, the Department of Justice is threatening to collude with school board administrations to suggest that these parents are terrorists. This is an extraordinarily perverse time in American history. Excellence in dentistry. That's what you're going to get at Williamsburg Dental. My friend Bob Spinato is back on the phone. He's in Broomall, just off the Blue Route. And with 2 new associates, now you can expand and offer more hours, maybe evening hours, possibly weekends, Bob.
Yeah, one of the things that I told them from early on when they started with me was the value of not only their own time, but other people's times. And they run on a similar schedule that I do. If you've got a 1 o'clock appointment, you're in their chair at 1 o'clock. And it's something that across the board at Williamsburg Dental, we really pride ourselves on, whether it's an appointment with the hygienist or whether it's an appointment with one of our doctors. The other thing is we now have some expanded hours in the evenings, and even there's some discussion about opening again on some Saturdays for services.
Yeah, but not you. You're fishing. You're not kidding anybody. It's not you going to be working on Saturday. Come on,
Well, I'm in my 33rd year, and it should be the young guns.
That's so right. You've earned it. You've earned it.
I feel like I have. Thank you.
Pick up the phone or go online, make that appointment, 610-353-2700 or williamsburg-dental.com. Randy Weingarten, lunatic, American Federation for Teachers. It's the woman, no apologies whatsoever, has been floating around on television interviews, claiming to be this great heroine for the children, trying to open the schools, rewriting history, pretending as though she wasn't one of the chief advocates to keep schools closed and keep kids out of school, setting learning back in this country by a lot.
What's happened is that we have been so siloed for so long. And what's happening now is that we're vitiating those silos. We're taking them down. We're actually being together in this big, big field of dreams, of a new economy and a vision, and all sorts of, whether you call it CHIPS or the Inflation Reduction Act, but all sorts of things that are out there that says to employers, that says to communities, that says about climate and the new things that could happen and be made in America, that there is, to build it, we need to also build and invest in the young people and also the not so young people who want these jobs of today and tomorrow.
That is the head of the American Federation for Teachers, who apparently is either, if that was her own words, that she's either the speechwriter for Kamala Harris or one of Kamala Harris's speechwriters now works for her. Although credit on the word vitiate. I had to look that up. Never used that before. Might try to stick that in there. It's a smart word for such an incoherent rant. Vitiate.
And she's like,
for those of you at home, that $60,000 word, to spoil or impair the quality of. Vitiate. It's a verb.
Chris, like for whatever she just said, the video, her arms are like flailing. It's like, what are you talking about?
If you told me that the woman was a raging alcoholic, it wouldn't shock me in the least. Sincerely. If we found out ultimately she was just full of vodka, wouldn't surprise me. Joe Biden, remember how these people talk about, it's collectivist speak. Joe Biden just, we had the clip. They're our children. Ours.
Rebecca put a teacher's creed into words when she said, there's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children.
Remember the Massachusetts State Agency just shared this with you, trying to make it illegal for you to deny your child gender-affirming care. You as a parent, little Eddie comes to you and says, I want to be a girl. And you go, no. And then little Eddie goes to school and says, Daddy won't let me be a girl. And the state can come and lock you up for not letting your son transition to be a girl. That's what Massachusetts and one of their agencies is proposing. Then you heard old Joe there. They're all our children. Karine Jean-Pierre, Pepe Le Pew, the White House press secretary, continuing with that same theme.
There are more than 600 pieces of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation out there. A few hundred of them are anti-trans community. And that matters because we have to call that out. And we've never seen this level. It's historic in the number of pieces of legislation. And I've met a lot of parents of trans kids in the past couple of months who have told me these devastating stories, whether they're in Texas or Oklahoma or wherever they are, saying how they now have to seriously consider leaving their state to protect their child. And that's something that we have to call out and continue to be very clear about, that these are kids. These are our kids. They belong to all of us.
It's a running theme, isn't it, with these people? They belong to all of us. These are our kids. Until, of course, you want to kill it. Outright kill it. Now, if you want to mangle it like you're in Frankenstein's lab, they're all our kids. If you'd like to murder it in the womb or murder it after it survived a botched abortion, it's your decision, it's your choice, and we're to butt the hell out. So this collectivist speak only applies when they want to rally everyone to the idea that we can genitally mutilate our children to become a different gender, chemically castrate them, this social experimentation. Then the kids are ours. Kill the kid outright, murder the kid, that's still your decision, ladies. Follow? I just want to make sure everybody is following the rules. Parents, this is going to take this, I'm afraid. NBC News in, I believe this out of Chicago. Parents file a police report after teacher offers LGBTQ-themed book to her middle schoolers. Sarah Bonner has been an Illinois middle school teacher for 20 years. She's always tried to offer her students a diverse collection of books. Well, this year, a parent called the police over her book choice. It started on Monday, March 13th. When she held what she called a book tasting for students. Quote, I wanted to give them a smattering of fiction and nonfiction books to choose from on a day that we call Reading Monday. We just read and celebrate books. One of those books was Juno Dawson's book called This Book is Gay. It's a best-selling nonfiction book that's billed by its publisher as entertaining and informative instruction manual for anyone coming out as gay, lesbian, bi, or trans. By Wednesday, I received notice that parents had gotten a hold of pictures from that book that their child had taken in class. By Friday, I was told parents had filed a police report against me for child endangerment. The notion that I was putting children in danger because of books, I didn't feel safe, Bonner says. I knew I couldn't go back. She didn't feel safe. You get it? So she shows an LGBTQ-themed book to middle school kids. Parents object. She feels unsafe. Get it? Another game they play. Back to Obama. Your speech, your set of facts is violence. Same with AOC. They all say the same thing. Your speech is violence. Your set of facts is violence. Your set of facts is propaganda and lies. Our speech, our platforms, our presentations are virtuous and truthful and not violent. I feel unsafe when you object to me. I feel unsafe when you object to me is the game they play. It's a great trick. I sexualize your children. You object. You are threatening to me. Ron DeSantis down in Florida signed a bill on Monday defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at all state universities, which he calls a distraction from the core mission. This is better viewed as standing for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, and has no place in our public institutions. If you want to do things like gender ideology, go to Berkeley, DeSantis said. Nothing wrong with that per se, but for us with our tax dollars, we don't want to focus. We want to focus on the classical mission of what university is supposed to be. Under the law, Florida state universities are barred from spending state or federal funds to promote, support, or maintain any programs that, quote, advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion or promote, engage in political or social activism. What this does is reorient our universities back to their traditional mission, and part of that traditional mission is to treat people as individuals, not to try to divvy them up based on any type of superficial characteristics, DeSantis said. This is a war, ladies and gentlemen. It's the biggest war we're fighting today. K through 12, and then that traditional four-year education after 12. This is your one shot to get it right. You people that have kids of a certain age, you have one shot with these kids, one. And your decision, our collective decision, is are we going to continue to send our kids to this woman who now says, I have every right to show your kids any sexualized books, any gender, the school's official position is we are going to counsel, enable, encourage, cheer, expose your children to sex, sexuality, gender transitioning themes. We're going to talk with them about it. We're going to talk with them about it in secret. You're not allowed in. Meanwhile, you're not allowed in. Follow this? Back to the Carrie Lucas piece. Stitch all this together. We're going to sexualize them. We're going to expose them to these things. We're going to let them come to us, and we're going to talk to them, and we're going to counsel them, and we're going to keep that from you. And if you object, you're a menace, you're violent, I feel unsafe, your kid feels unsafe, we may have to call law enforcement on you. You're not allowed into the classroom. You're not allowed into the conversation. You're kept out. They're all our kids. They're all our... Do you hear this? All these stories have a theme. They're all stitched together in the same theme. Every one. That teacher who said she feels unsafe because parents object to the book. It's Karine Jean-Pierre saying they're all our kids. I don't feel safe when you object. When your legislators pass laws to ban this stuff, I don't feel safe. My children aren't safe. You're a menace. You're violent. Your speech is violent. You may not even be in rightful possession of your own kids. Why, your young son or daughter just wants to explore their sexuality or wants to change their gender. What kind of monster are you to not allow it? I'm not so sure you're a fit parent. Might need to call the state agency on you. And don't you come knocking on the school door asking what we're showing him or her in class. And don't you dare challenge me for having private conversations with your kid about their gender. Don't you dare. And don't even try to get into this school, by the way. You're not allowed. Don't even come into the building. They're like prisons. Like, there's greater visitation privileges in prisons than there are in a lot of schools these days. Seriously. I think prisons, some of them still have conjugal visits. There are schools that won't let you touch your kid until they're put on the bus. I'm kind of not kidding. So you have... This is so important to me. I think it's ball game. I think it's everything. I think this is more important than ballot harvesting. It's more important than who the next president is. It's more important than who the next United States senator is. It's more important than your state legislature. Your kid and his education or her education and where it comes from and who's in charge. Who gets them for the 8 hours a day you're at work or more? Who gets them? Who gets them? Because who wants them more gets them. Who wants them more? Who wants Adam? Who wants to expose them to their ideology more? You? Or these people? These people who speak like this, who say they're our children, these collectivists. I know it's exhausting and I know it's hard. Believe me, I get it. Being a parent, having your head on a swivel 24/7 is exhausting. It's a finite amount of time, though. And then they're on their own. And these monsters, they are constantly coming up with creative new ways to indoctrinate them. And they're now coming up with this newspeak that if you challenge them, you're the violent one. You're the threat. You're the menace. You're the problem. And there are state agencies that are now suggesting if you try to stand in the way of butchering them, you might be the criminal. Once upon a time, you might have said cutting the genitals off an 8-year-old would be criminal behavior. Now there are certain places where they're entertaining the thought that if you stop the genital mutilation of children, you're the criminal. Not an exaggeration. All legitimate news stories, all in front of me today. There are children. These kids, they belong to all of us. The hell they do. It really is. The jingle is true. For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com. I'm sleeping like a baby. I can't lie about it. I mean, I have this MyPillow body pillow I use every single night. Tuck it under the blankets, lay next to me. I know, not very romantic on Valentine's Day, but most of us that have been married and you're sleeping nightly, after a while, people sleep hot. I don't know about you. I get hot. I need space. But MyPillow, what's so great about MyPillow and their new MyPillow 2.0 technology is it's exactly for people that sleep hot. So I get this side sleeping thing where I just can't sleep on my back or my stomach. I like sleeping on the side. Maybe you do too. This body pillow they make, like it doesn't get hot, but it is so supportive. And it's like 3 feet long. So it's just perfect to lay your head on. You can tuck it in between your knees to take a little pressure off the lower back or the knees. I love it. Plus, I'm on these Giza Dream Sheets, which are crazy comfortable. We've got the towels, which are super absorbent. We dry off with every morning, thanks to MyPillow.com. My dog, Dean, is on the MyPillow bed for the dog. Loves it. And that's just some of the products. Right now, I'm sipping my coffee. Mike has his own line of coffee. I got the light brew. I think next time I'm going to order the dark brew and try that. But all of these products and so many more, from the robes to the slippers, Christine loves her MyPillow slippers. You got to check it out. And if you go to MyPillow.com and order today, you use my promo code ChrisPodcast. ChrisPodcast. That allows you to save up to 66% on everything on the website. And it also lets them know that you listen to the podcast, which means a lot to me. They're advertising with me in the hopes to reach you. I know you're going to love the products, but when you let them know Chris Podcast, it gets you the discount and lets them know you listen. So thanks for that. It's a three-legged stool. Hopefully everybody wins. So MyPillow.com, promo code Chris, or for the best customer service, you should know everything you order, 60-day money-back guarantee, a 10-year warranty. So they're really high-quality products and made here in the United States. So 800-932-5056 to order in person, 800-932-5056, or MyPillow.com, promo code Chris. Well, Fast Eddie, we've made it. This week, finally, I'm happy to announce my firstborn son, my oldest son, gonna graduate from high school.
Wow. Oh, my gosh, man. Congrats.
And I'm not going to fill you in on all the details, but suffice it to say, if ever there were a congrats that I'm going to take and hoist high and own, it's that one. Damn straight. I earned every moment of that congratulations. I'll take it in spades. My wife, too. This Sunday is the graduation ceremony, and I have to tell you that ceremony for us is going to be every bit as much for us as it's going to be for him. I've never been happier about something in my life. including my parents, his grandparents. My son, let's just suffice it to say, is he's not one for academics. It was never much his speed. Just didn't care for it, which not unusual. But, still in all, when you're the parent of an 18-year-old, you've got to make them do things. And it's funny, a lot of 18-year-old boys, they're what you might call willful. And they have their own ideas about things. And I'm not going to lie to you, ladies and gentlemen. I am more than ready to stand on the front porch and wish him well for a while. Congratulations to my boy.
Absolutely.
Over there at MSNBC, Chris Hayes having a conversation about Elon Musk and Twitter. Have you noticed the theme here? This happened on CNBC. Remember the guy a couple of days ago on CNBC asking Elon Musk, why do you keep saying these things publicly? What is your deal? I mean, just say them in private to friends, but you keep saying this stuff publicly on Twitter. People have to do business with you. You run Tesla. This theme keeps going. They keep having this conversation that Elon Musk is now someone with whom you should not do business. Chris Hayes and some New York Times types are sitting around discussing this. Listen.
The other thing we should note about this is that a big talking point on the right now is, look, Twitter just got rid of 90% of its staff and it operates just the same. And by the way, no, it does not.
Right.
You are searching for the word cat, and you get a cat literally inside of a blender being blended to death. Don't want to talk about that on TV, but that is what's going on. And that's because he ripped out the wires that would have made that happen, and he eliminated the staff that would have checked. I talked to the guy who used to run this. He said there were multiple layers of redundancy that would prevent snuff films from appearing on this website. And now they're gone. Yeah. And look, this guy is going through what a lot of people did during the pandemic, right? We all know somebody who kind of lost it because they were deep on the internet. They went all the way in, and they were previously kind of normal, or they were a little bit funky, and then they lost it, right? Yeah. That's what's going on. I'm just wondering how long.
Watching it.
Yes, we're happening in real time. I'm just wondering how long titans of industry and people who are trying to do business with this guy and his other ventures are going to put up with this stuff.
There it is. Did you hear it? Did you hear it? That's the nugget right there at the end. By the way, while I was listening to that, typed cat in the search engine at Twitter, and all that comes up is a bunch of anime from Asia.
Oof.
And then videos of cats doing wacky things. I see no cat in a blender. I literally try it yourself if you're on Twitter. Just type cat in the search engine of Twitter. Nothing about cats and blenders come up. But the nugget in that, and the reason I wanted you to hear that, is this is a running theme now. Tucker has announced he's going to partner with Elon to take his show there. What is this about? Tucker going to Twitter. That's what this is about. And now they did this to Tucker at Fox. They're doing it to Elon now. They're starting to challenge corporate America. You going to advertise on Twitter? You going to do business there? Really? Andrew C. McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, joins us. Jim Jordan just taking to the mic. So, Andy, we'll listen for a second, if you don't mind, and see what Jim has to say here.
The agenda in far too many of our federal agencies. Don't believe me, just read the Durham report from a couple days ago, where they outline what exactly took, where you had the FBI and the Justice Department start an investigation with no predicate, no evidence, no probable cause whatsoever. But today it's worse. Today it's worse. It's not just going after presidential candidates, presidential campaigns. Today it's the American people. If you're a parent attending a school board meeting, you're a pro-lifer praying at a clinic, or you're a Catholic simply going to Mass, you are a target of the government, target of the FBI. And maybe even worse than all that, if you're one of the thousands of good employees, brave whistleblowers who's willing to come forward, if you're one of these folks willing to come forward and talk about what's going on out there, you get attacked. They will try to crush you. And today we're going to hear in a hearing, just less than an hour from now, we will hear from 3 of those individuals. We have talked to over 24 whistleblowers. We have interviewed several of those individuals, and 3 of them are willing to come forward today and testify in our hearing. You all have a report that outlines what we've uncovered, what these whistleblowers have brought to us. And today, as I said, you're going to get to hear from 3 of them. You will hear how they come and talked about those very things I just mentioned, the school board's issue, the Catholic memo, this effort to inflate and make every case seem as if it's some domestic violent extremism case. But you'll also hear about how the FBI retaliated against these guys. How when Mr. O'Boyle was moving his family from Kansas to Virginia, they kept his belongings locked up, wouldn't let him get access to his kids' clothes. They had a newborn, all the things they did to these, wouldn't let Mr. Friend get access to his firearm training records so he could get employment. The FBI's admitted that they were wrong to do that. So you're going to hear from them today, and we're looking forward to that. We think it will be a powerful hearing, powerful testimony from some great Americans who have served our country and been retaliated against because they were willing to come give us information, valuable information about the targeting of American people.
Okay, so you get the thrust of it there. That was the live remarks today from Jim Jordan, the House Judiciary Committee holding these hearings today, hearing from whistleblowers. I do have a story here from CBS News. IRS whistleblower and Hunter Biden investigation has been removed from probe. He and his entire investigative team are being removed per the Justice Department's decision, at the request of the Justice Department. So I'm here to discuss it. Former federal prosecutor Andrew C. McCarthy. One of these whistleblowers, Mr. McCarthy, good morning to you.
Morning, Chris. It's very disturbing. You know, it'd be the biggest. I don't mean to interrupt myself, but I'm just remembering the flush of things is coming to me as I'm listening to what you just played for your audience. And I just marvel at the fact that in connection with the Ukraine impeachment, which was completely overblown, the congressional Democrats who were in charge of Congress at that point acted like the identity of that person was a state secret that had to be protected with people's lives because he was a whistleblower. So we were dealing with the sanctified, vaunted status of whistleblower. And here we are, seemingly 5 minutes later. And because the shoe's on the other foot, Congress is in control of the other party, and the whistleblowers are exposing one of the great scandals in modern American politics that Democrats and the media are hoping will whistle by. It turns out that the FBI or the Justice Department has the whistleblower FBI team removed from the Hunter. Well, that's another thing. It shouldn't be the Hunter Biden investigation, the Biden investigation, yes, because they've said the obvious part out loud, which is there's no explanation for the fact that that thing is dormant, hasn't moved, hasn't charged anyone, hasn't focused on the thing of national security importance, which is the millions of foreign dollars, including from anti-American regimes, pouring into the Biden family coffers. The reason that thing hasn't moved is because there's been political interference. And that was just what they were saying, Chris. I don't see how you could get a better example of political interference than removing the investigator.
Yeah. The House Oversight Committee has subpoenaed phone records of a phone belonging to President Joe Biden that Hunter Biden's business paid for. That comes from Peter Schweitzer. Peter Schweitzer said in an interview that it was discovered on Hunter Biden's laptop that he was paying a phone bill for his father from 2009 to 2017, which encompassed the time Biden was vice president. We obtained that number, and we shared it with individuals on the Oversight Committee in Congress. They're going to subpoena those phone records, and what's important here is that it's not a government phone. This is not Joe Biden's private phone he's paying for himself. It's actually Hunter Biden's business that paid for it. I think it's going to yield a lot of interesting information. I mean, I know you probably can't independently verify that, but do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm sure they didn't discuss it, because they never discussed anything, Hunter and Joe. So I'm assuming that Hunter just paid for it. I think it was probably something like, you remember, I'm dating myself here, but this is like Kreskin. Do you remember the amazing Kreskin from years ago? He was he was the ESP guy. So I think Hunter just gets these brainstorms and he says, I better start paying money for Joe's obligations. And Joe gets these brainstorms and says, I better start showing up at dinner with Hunter's business associates. But they never talk about anything. It's telepathic. It's remarkable.
You've been under a lot of demand, I know, since the Durham report formally came out. So this thing now formally comes out much later than everybody, I think, who was hoping for vindication pre-election 2020 would have wanted. But anyway, it came out. And it's really amazing. If you're a partisan on the left, they say it was a dud. They say it was a nothing. Nothing came from it. Nothing new. Literally what they said was straight faces. How did you read it?
I think I think Durham has done a very valuable job in at least laying out the narrative, building on top of the things that we already knew.
You wrote the book on it. I mean, I don't want to, I know you won't puff yourself up, but literally we've been talking for years. You wrote this is your book, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. You literally wrote the best-selling book on it. You did some time ago. The Durham report seems to be like this is like I don't know, if you want, it's like a report that basically says your bestseller was all true.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I guess for that reason, Chris, I think there's very good in this, but there's also things that convince me that the FBI is beyond repair. And I've actually, I've been trying to, it disturbs me. And I feel like I'm talking to you when I haven't fully formulated what I think of all this. But, I've been reading the Durham report, obviously, and I was hoping to find in it things that were unknown to me, that I couldn't have known, 4 or 5 years ago when I was writing that book, that would have made this make more sense. And to the contrary, what I see is a system that can't hold anyone accountable, and for that reason continues to build on the misconduct. And I don't mean to be elliptical about this. Let me give you a concrete example, because I think this is the best one. This character, Brian Auten, who figures prominently in the Durham investigation, and who then goes on to make mayhem and mischief in the Biden investigation. And where I'm going with this is, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the letter of the 51 intelligence officials that basically suppressed or tried to suppress the New York Post reporting about the Hunter Biden laptop. The CIA has gotten a lot of grief for that, as it should. So have those national security agents. But I think that that letter was the culmination of an arrangement or a conspiracy between congressional Democrats and the FBI to discredit the information that was being generated by Senators Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson regarding all the money that was coming into the Bidens. And the guy who's in the middle of all that is Brian Auten. And I'm asking myself, how on earth is Brian Auten assigned to that when he's under investigation internally at the FBI for his involvement in the debriefing of Stigall, which resulted in gross misleading of the FISA court in connection with the Russiagate investigation? And the only answer I can come up with is that they don't hold anyone accountable. And therefore, people just go on from one misadventure to the next misadventure. And it seems to me that's exactly what happened here. And my disappointment, I think there's the greatness of the Durham report is that we now at least have a narrative of what happened. The fact that they opened a case without predication, the fact that they misled the court, all that stuff, it's very good to have just a straightforward factual recitation of what happened. The bad in it is, when you assign a prosecutor to do something, an exercise like that, if it seems like there's law violations, somewhere at the bottom of that, you have to prosecute the people who are responsible. And I know that Durham's prosecutions, the ones he chose to do, were not particularly successful. But let me give you an example of what makes me so frustrated here. Durham says it's obvious that the court was misled. The FISA court was misled. So he tries to get to the bottom of that. And what he basically says is the FBI agents who talked to Stigall have one recollection. The people at headquarters have a different recollection about how information got to the FISA court in the way that it did. We couldn't interview Stigall because he's a Brit who was overseas who wouldn't deigned to be interviewed. We couldn't interview Danchenko, who was Steele's main source. And therefore, while it's very troubling to us that reality seemed to be this and what they told the court was the opposite of this, we can't prosecute anyone for that because we can't get to the bottom of who's really responsible for it, given the failure of people's recollections and the lack of a paper trail.
Andy,
those got friggin' lied to. Somebody had to figure that out. And this is.
Yeah. So I guess I'd ask you, Andy McCarthy, that's where this audience, obviously, people want justice. They want people to pay. They want somebody to go to jail. And you say they get around this ultimately, this notion that they lied to the FISA court. And this is the sticking point with this audience and you and me and the conversations we've had over the years. Were these full-blown lies, or can they credibly say, well, it was kind of gray and left to interpretation, and as such, it's not really a violation of the law, and there's been all this gray that's always kind of led us to feel very unsatisfied that you can actually document crimes that have been committed to prosecute people, is the way I felt that this has gone, this conversation with you and me, for the last few years, as a matter of fact. Is that about right?
Yep. Yeah, look, this is why I have, I feel the frustration of your audience here, and I know that I've told them over the years, and I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. It's very hard to prove misconduct in terms of the investigative judgments that people make. I know people wanted like the big racketeering or some kind of big conspiracy prosecution against like the higher ups in this who made it all happen. And I explained, I know it's frustrating because we've talked about it a million times, right? Why these cases are so hard to make when you're dealing with high-level officials who have lots of discretion. It's hard to prove that they acted corruptly. You can get a sense that they acted corruptly, but proving it in court beyond a reasonable doubt is a different thing. However, I can't keep saying that when there are other things that are obviously crimes. When a court gets misled, that's a crime. And the way I read the Durham report, what he says is the court got misled, somebody here ain't telling the truth, and after 4 years we can't figure it out, at least in a way that we could prove it in court. And they say a lot of things about the differences in people's recollections, and we couldn't interview. There's a lot of cases. I was a prosecutor for a very long time. You don't get to interview the defendant in most cases. That doesn't stop them from making the case. You know?
So as a man of the law, I know you're probably loath to do this, but as you read this now with the totality of this picture painted for you, do you think there are names you could name that you believe have violated the law? Like, are there individuals you believe you, Andy McCarthy, could point to and say, I think it's pretty likely that guy committed a crime? Or are you not prepared to go that far yet, based on what you know?
I believe that the FBI agents who were responsible for the FISA court, I would start from the premise that there was a lie that was intentionally, or there were lies that were intentionally told to the FISA court. And that there were people who were the only people who were in a position to tell those lies. And then I would start with that as a premise, and I would work backwards and see who may not have been involved in that. But somebody misled the court. And Chris, I'm loath to. John Durham's a very fine. He's a very experienced, very good, honest, scrupulous prosecutor. I think part of the reason we're in a situation where at the end he says, something bad happened here, but given what the standards of proof are, it's not possible to charge anyone and be confident that you could get a conviction. And from his perspective, he did charge 3 people and he got 2 acquittals. So I understand why he would be gun shy about that kind of thing. So I have to defer to him since he was the closest to it for 5 years. But man, I don't know how you explain to people, somebody lied to the court. We gave it to a prosecutor. He had 5 years to figure out. And what he comes back and says is somebody lied to the court.
Wow. Andrew C. McCarthy, here's what's interesting. We have a fraudulent case built around a candidate who ultimately becomes president, that he colluded with Russia to win, and that he was colluding with Russia. That was the predicate for, impeachment and antagonizing his entire tenure as president. Then we find that the current sitting president, who was then vice president, was actually doing business with foreign governments like Russia, Ukraine, Romania, China, taking a lot of money, or at least his family was. There's this laptop that's real, and what do? They use that same line. It's Russia. It's fake. It's Russia interfering with the election. And you got 51 high-ranking government officials to sign off on a letter that it was a fake laptop. It wasn't even real. That wasn't a real story. Of course it's a real laptop. I mean, that's a separate story, but it's kind of part and parcel of the same thing, this high-level deception. Making up things that aren't true, making up things that aren't there, and then making up things to deflect from what is real and is there.
Yeah. Well, the question, Chris, is what are we, we're paying $100 billion a year just for these intelligence agencies, which is almost as much as we have to pay for like interest on the debt, right? So, if you're the American people, I think you have to sit and look at this and say, first of all, there was no evidence on this at all that this thing was Russian disinformation, right? Yep. So you have the thing where our best and brightest intelligence agents leap to the conclusion based on nothing of Russian disinformation. So that's the conclusion they give you. But then the other thing you have to ask, which is, I don't think I've seen reporting on this. I've asked this question, but I haven't seen a lot of other people ask it. But if they looked at it long enough, as they say they did, to assess it and think that it was Russian disinformation, then how could they not have noticed all the millions of dollars that were going from the foreign governments to the Bidens? And since they told us that they don't have, stuck in the fine print of the letter, it says, this is just basically our feeling based on this having all the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation. I don't see any of the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation, by the way, but that aside, if they looked at it long enough to notice the classic earmarks, doesn't over $10 million from the Chinese Communist government into the Biden family coffers that are detectable from this laptop, doesn't that merit a mention? Don't you say in the letter, this may bear the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation, but it is a little bit alarming to see all this Chinese money, too. So we think that should be investigated as well. There's nothing like that in there.
I don't know. I don't mean to drag you into politics, and I know your time is tight, but I would just say this can't not be a focal point of the next presidential campaign. This can't not be. And I know people say they don't want to rehash the 2020 election. They don't want to rehash interference, Russia collusion, blah, blah, blah. They don't want to rehash that stuff. But I don't, Andy, given all that we've just talked about, all you and I have been talking about for years, how is this not central to the way our government functions, how we go forward, restoring, if we can, any kind of faith in the Department of Justice and the voters of this country? How do you not make this central to a presidential election? How do you avoid it?
Yeah, Chris, see, I don't see this as rehashing the 2020 election. I see this as a gargantuan example of governmental abuse and the exploitation and leveraging of the law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of the government in favor of partisan politics. That's got nothing to do with whether ballots got changed or
That's right.
any of that stuff. That what we're talking about is central. I mean, what people care about is two tiers of justice, where the quality of justice you get depends on what your political affiliation is, and the fact that this government bureaucracy has its thumb on the scale in favor of Democrats. Those are
in concert with the media.
And I wouldn't vote for a Republican candidate who said, well, that's all relitigating the last election. I don't want to get into that. Then if that's your position, then I don't want you. I need somebody who's going to go in there and fix this.
In concert with the media, important to add, right? Working in concert with media and social media companies, which is not a small matter.
It hasn't stopped.
No, it hasn't.
I mean, if anything has been clear since Durham released his report, is that they're not contrite. They're not, they're just moving on.
Final question. This is just a side story, which is kind of interesting. Top federal prosecutor in Massachusetts, United States Attorney Rachel Rollins, to resign after watchdog reports released on Wednesday found she violated longstanding Justice Department rules and possibly the law by trying to sway a local election. I don't know. Do you have any thought? Like, it's so rare to see anybody inside the circles of this DOJ and Merrick Garland's team. I've never heard of anybody getting crossways with anyone inside the Biden administration or anybody serving underneath it. So it's kind of rare.
I think, Chris, what it says is that they're nervous about it. I mean, I think they realize that, we've now kind of hit a tipping point where it's so obvious that they don't care. They put their own people. We've had a lot of these contentious confirmation hearings where, they have some radical who comes in who is being nominated clearly because they're going to advance a radical political agenda. These are like judicial nominees. They can't tell you, what the first article of the Constitution says. We had one yesterday, didn't know what the Commerce Clause was, didn't know what the Dormant Commerce Clause was, which I don't expect everyone in your audience or anyone maybe in your audience to know. But when you're being nominated to go to the Court of Appeals of the United States and the Supreme Court has just released an opinion on the Dormant Commerce Clause like 5 minutes ago, you should be able to talk to the Senate about that. So we get all these kinds of nominees who are clearly unqualified. Some of them are corrupt. And the only reason that they're being nominated is to move the woke progressive agenda from within the government, wielding their power to do that. And people are noticing that and angry about it. And I think they now realize that some of it is so bad they have to do something about it because it's going to hurt them politically. But it doesn't stop them from putting the crazies in. I mean, they put terrible people in some of the U.S. Attorney's office and on the courts. It's just, and the U.S. attorneys will be out within, a few years. The court guys are forever. I mean, some of those people are going to be on the bench for decades, and it's going to be a catastrophe.
Andrew C. McCarthy at National Review, his latest, the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation, formally opened on false pretenses. It now confirms it's the closing government-authored chapter of the book that he authored very, very well and made a New York Times bestseller and was the authoritative book on this story well before the media was willing to talk about it. Ball of Collusion is what it's called, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. Andy, great to talk to you again, my friend. Thank you. On Capitol Hill yesterday, our buddy Julio Rosas, author of the New York Times bestseller, back at #1 thanks to this performance yesterday. Fiery but mostly peaceful. The 2020 riots and the gaslighting of America. My colleague, senior writer at townhall.com. Julio, you're getting applause from all corners, nationwide, coast to coast, for your performance yesterday in this House Homeland Security Committee hearing on left-wing violence. You locked horns with a very aggressive Democrat who had some words for you. Not backing down, though, Julio. Good morning. Well done.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're a humble guy. I don't know how you take all this praise, but people were highly entertained by your exchange with Representative Dan Goldman of New York. Who is this guy? What's his angle exactly? What was his beef with you yesterday?
Well, so Daniel Goldman is a silver spoon-fed trust fund baby who bought his congressional seat that represents Wall Street. And he was basically using his time. And actually, funny enough, he's not on the subcommittee that normally, but he is on the full House Homeland Security Committee, and members can join subcommittees that they're not normally on. And so I was told prior to the hearing that he'd be joining us for Tuesday, and that to me signaled that he was going to come and make a scene, and obviously he did. But he was saying that people shouldn't trust me because I'm just a senior writer at Town Hall, and said people should, of all organizations, people should trust the FBI, which is absolutely insane given what we've learned just in the past few days. I mean, forget recent history, right? But just what we've learned in the past few days. He's like, no, we should trust the FBI, which I was absolutely gobsmacked hearing all of this. And admittedly, I was a little frustrated because I couldn't respond to him in the moment because, it is, their 5 minutes. They can do what they want. But thankfully, Congressman Eli Crane of Arizona, he allowed me time to respond, because it's ridiculous to try to just talk down to me because of my title. And to be clear, I wasn't invited to testify because of my title. I was called to testify because I have seen Antifa firsthand riot in many cities across this country. And, who cares what my title is? It's my expertise of being on the ground, which Daniel Goldman was not. That's why I was called to testify.
Let's be very clear about something. The left wants people to believe that the only people that you can trust with information, and by the way, I wouldn't even say this is the left. I think there's a fair amount of this just kind of establishment political belief in general. They don't like anything but network. I mean, Obama said it yesterday. Obama said, we all need to have an agreed upon certain set of facts. And we used to have that when I was a youngster, coming up with 3 television stations. They all have this same idea that townhall.com or a talk radio show or a podcast, that can't be a legitimate source of information. Only their institutions are the legitimate, trusted, agreed-upon set of facts, Julio. And I think that's an important, broader point that we need to continue to focus on. They want to delegitimize you and delegitimize townhall.com and Salem Media, your parent company, my parent company, as though we're somehow illegitimate sources of information.
Yeah, and it's because, and the reason why they're doing that is because my reporting completely disproves the narrative that they want to push. And so it's the classic, if you can't attack the message, you go and attack the messenger. And so that's exactly what happened. And so I thought it was amusing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, because I've watched plenty of hearings during my time at writing. I mean, I've been gotten into the journalism business since 2017. So there's been a lot of hearings. So you know that there's performances that go along with it. And so, but I admit it's different when you're on the receiving end of a meltdown like that. So it was. I found it amusing that he decided to go that route because like I said, I knew he was going to be the most problematic out of all of them. I just didn't expect to be so front and center of that performance.
The FBI story today, the Russia collusion stuff, the Hunter Biden laptop stuff, all of this kind of new, fresh gaslighting. Until this hearing yesterday, where I really stopped and thought, so much of, I don't want to say January 6th, because I don't want to dismiss January 6th for whatever it was, but I'm not so sure that a lot of January 6th wasn't, or at least the anger around that day and the ensuing anger afterward, isn't rooted in what your book's about and what a lot of us watched. When the country descended into violence and we were told that we needed to give these people the space to destroy, and, people making excuses, and many times Democrats marching with them in the streets as we're watching cities and neighborhoods burned out and looted and robbed. And we were somehow told that this was justice, not violence. I think I forget that chapter. It was also in the middle of COVID. But that chapter, I think so many Americans were sitting at home watching this destruction and being told it isn't what you see with your own eyes. And it made millions of people furious, and I think they're still furious about that.
Yeah, because the media ran the same playbook that they've always run, which is protect Democrats. And when it comes to things like Russiagate or COVID, it's easier for them to fool people because it's some of those stuff is harder to see. It's not as in your face, as opposed to mass looting and burning buildings, right? I mean that's harder for the media to gaslight people on. Don't get me wrong, they've done that successfully with some NPCs. But when you have, again, people can see, people can hear, and again, people experience this. I mean, this happened in so many places across the country. Millions of Americans were affected by it, and of course they're going to just say, no, that's not what happened because I lived in these areas, or I used to go shopping at these areas, so. That's why it's so astonishing to me that the media ran that playbook because I think it just shows the hubris that they have, that they think that they have that much power and control of the narrative when in reality they don't. But it just shows just how corrupt the media can be.
I feel stupid saying this because it's a given. Nobody likes or supports violence of any kind. Any violence based in politics is always wrong, from the right or the left. This hearing was specifically a House Homeland Security Committee hearing on left-wing violence. We're told there is no such thing as left-wing violence. In fact, the only violence, the only threat. Biden keeps saying it. He gives commencement speeches where he says the biggest threat, the only threat, is, right-wing or white supremacist or pro-government threats to the country and to democracy and all of this business, as though there is no such thing as left-wing violence. So is that the thrust of this hearing yesterday, Julio? And, of course, your book, Fiery But Mostly Peaceful, the 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. Violence is violence, and it should be denounced wherever it's found, but let's not pretend the left is not violent, is my point. Your point.
I mean, that was the point of the hearing is that, look, I mean, in the previous Congress, there was a whole committee just about January 6th. And so the point of the hearing was to say, look, there is violence from the extremes on both sides, but we can't ignore the left because you guys don't like to acknowledge that it happens, or you try to downplay its severity. And so it's not complicated, right? Like this shouldn't be complicated. And I covered January 6th. I consider it to be a riot. It was the weirdest riot I ever covered, just because it was the most preventable riot I also have ever covered, and that's a discussion for another time. But that was the point of the hearing, is to say, look, and that's what I said in my testimony. Just overall, is like we are headed down a very dangerous path. If tensions aren't lowered, if action's not taken, then things like the outcome of the 2024 election can spark another wave of violence, because everyone seems to be escalating instead of de-escalating, and that to me is worrisome, because America's in a tough spot right now thanks to the Biden administration, but I still love this country. I want it to succeed, but the violence that we saw in 2020 is not sustainable for any nation, and America's no exception.
May I ask you a darker, more sinister question, and I don't know if you go there or not. Do you think that when you talk about this stuff being preventable, that leads me to ask the question, are there people in power you believe allowing it, fomenting it, stirring it, hoping for it, maybe even designing it? Is that too far for you, or are you willing to say that?
I mean, I wouldn't put that out of the question, because 2020 really showed me that people will do anything when there's no consequences, right? I mean, that's just human nature. That's why we have laws. That's why we have, because human nature is fallen, sinful, and so the extreme of that was the chaos. But I wouldn't say it's out of the question.
Is the violence useful? Do you think it's useful as a means to an end for certain people in power, do you think?
I think so, because I also see what's happening at our southern border, right? I mean, The Biden administration knows all the evil and the horrors that go on by, having the border open, but they're still doing it because they see a political benefit to it. They're willing to take the punches and the criticism and the obvious being called out of lies, because, again, like I said, they see a political benefit to it. So I can see that same logic being applied to mass chaos.
Thanks for going. I mean, you're a citizen, you're a journalist, you're a Marine, you're trying to serve your country. You do outstanding reporting, and this sniveling little punk Dan Goldman from New York taking shots at you and trying to discredit, Town Hall and the entire organization. Just scumbag. Like, what's he done? But thank you for the work and your service and your honesty, your truth-telling. The book, by the way, soaring to #1 again after your performance yesterday. Bravo. Congratulations. It's called Fiery But Mostly Peaceful, the 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. Julio Rosas. Thank you, Julio.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.